Hi, we're Up Close and Personal. I'm Joni Wedler, and we are with Peter Tercyak, who is Democratic State Representative for the Connecticut House District 26, which represents New Britain. Thank you so much for being with us today. We want to get up close and personal and find out all about you and all about what it means to be a state representative today in Connecticut.
Okay.
So you were always from New Britain, born and raised.
Nope, I was born in Waterville, Maine. That was where my father had his first teaching job in high school as a music teacher. That's where he met my mom. We were out of there by the time I was a year and a half. My brother, who's a year and a half younger, was born in Connecticut. Also not here, downstate, as my father was moving job by job as he could, trying to get back to New Britain.
Okay, family in New Britain?
Yeah, and he was born and raised in New Britain.
Born and raised in New Britain.
But what loyalty to a community.
Yes.
It wasn't like Waterville, Maine wasn't nice. They loved him there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But he wanted to come back home.
Yeah. It wasn't like living around, like teaching in Darien and living there was unpleasant. But he wanted to come to New Britain.
Do you still see that? I mean, you've been a state rep since 2003.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about that because it's a very interesting story. But don't you see people still have that loyalty to New Britain?
Yes.
I mean, they really do.
Yes. They really do.
They've been born there, they're raised there, they're supporting business there.
Yeah. Even among my constituents who are often older or newer as immigrants, where that tie to the homeland is so strong.
Yes.
And in Britain, for my people, that tie to our Polish heritage is so strong.
Oh, yes.
Even with all of that, that's seen as part of New Britain. You know, we have that.
You do.
Because we're in New Britain.
You do.
Because New Britain's people value that.
They support the restaurants,
that kind of diversity.
The churches, they do. They truly do. So when you looked to get involved in politics, I mean, you're a nurse.
Yes, that's how I got involved in politics.
And you were a nurse in a very good job, very lucrative job.
Yes.
So what made you decide to ever leave? Because for people who don't know, and some of us really don't know, that the state reps, it's a small compensation for the amount of work that's required and the amount of hours that are required. And so it really has to be a love for giving back to the community is why you do what you do. So how does that story go?
I first got involved in politics when I was a nurse, because at a certain point, you've reached what you can get done here and your patients still aren't getting what they deserve. And the solution to that is not to go to the superintendent and convince him to be nicer or to have more programming. The solution to that is through the legislature and through the budget process.
That's right.
We would do the best at everything, no matter what the cause is, if money was never an object. But it is, and there's always a competition to it. And you know, first they asked me to go on my street and hand out flyers. I didn't have to talk to anybody. Just, you know, we want to get these out in the district, hand them out. A couple months later, I was told, the election's getting closer. How about if you knock on the doors only of the Democrats on your street who you already gave papers to? They'll be the easiest for you to talk to. The thing I was asked to do after that was to volunteer on election day as a poll stander outside the polls.
Oh.
And by the time I was done spending all those hours poll standing and chatting with people who came up, if I had any doubts about the difference real politics made in real people's lives, that was over.
That was the defining moment.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
How I made the jump to state rep after saying forever I'm involved in electoral politics but have no interest in running myself, why would I? Okay, the world tells me not to say this, but it's true, so I will. It was on the front page of the Herald once upon a time, I believe. My father was a wonderful man. He was really special. He changed lives. He was as kind and gentle and generous as is possible. I, on the other hand, am selfish and vindictive.
I didn't expect that at all.
People didn't. But let me tell you, the general response was, why, how refreshing. I believe that. I think he's nicer than that. But that's better than, oh, blah, blah,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But if I was living in Hartford at the time, the phone rang. It was from one of the most conservative people on the New Britain Democratic Town Committee.
Okay.
And I'd been involved in New Britain politics. People thought of me as a New Britain guy, and who would ever correct them, you know?
Right.
I was living in Hartford. Peter, come back and run for your father's seat. You should do it. You know how we would vote and what a difference it makes.
What did your father say?
Oh, no, this was after my father died. This was, like, I don't know if he was in the ground yet. No, he wasn't. First call, one of the most conservative people. She knew how liberal I was. And I thought to myself, huh, boy, if she'll call and ask, I wonder what's going on. People came and pointed out, Peter, if you don't run, the guy who ran against your father last November is going to just waltz into the seat.
Okay, so your dad was in office at the time.
He had been before that.
Yes.
And so he died.
Yes.
The afternoon before President Bush came to New Britain for something or another at New Britain General Hospital. And it was, so off you went. So people would call up and say, Peter, do you know that so-and-so disagreed with your father and us about blah, 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 blah? Some of my friends say if they had been around and knew what was going on, they would have put a stop to it. But I was recruited.
You were recruited?
I was recruited.
And you were ready? Because you had some of this background.
Oh, very much,
willing
very
and
much,
able,
yeah.
And you were still working at the time.
Oh, yes, yes. And I knew that, and I said it, if I win, I'm going to have to leave my home in, my house in Hartford, in a neighborhood that I love, and come back to New Britain, which I also love.
Right.
But it would also mean giving up the job that I loved and was very proud of doing.
What were you doing?
By then, I was the nurse supervisor in the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. I started in the old Norwich Hospital, and then I was working in a mental health clinic in the north end of Hartford, you know.
You've seen it all.
As a nurse in psych, I have, and I've been very fortunate. 3 big changes in psych over our history. Institutionalization was a good thing for people who were otherwise going to get to freeze in the barn if it got cold enough.
Right.
You know? Then along came a couple of medications that, while loaded with side effects, set some people free. It was enough. Maybe they still heard the voices, but they knew the voices weren't in charge. Things like that. You know, people who had no self-control were getting it. While I was a nurse and working, we had the change that made the big deinstitutionalization possible. The third wave came, the newest atypical antipsychotic medications. We were almost afraid of them when they started. For the first one that came out, we made their patients get blood work every single week so we could look for side effects. That was the first time I was ever involved in a debate of, can we afford to do this? That medicine is expensive. And we still argue over that, over different things. And, but
Did they
the
work?
new wave, oh God, yes. You know, we did deinstitutionalization, we did community programs, and all those were good. But the reason we could do them and the reason they were working was that third wave of medications was touching the people who were never touched before. When I worked at CVH, I had a patient who had been put in the hospital with a commitment signed by the governor at the time, because way back when that was done. And you know why they decided she needed to be in a mental health institution? Because she was a young adult though, and she had run off with a Teamster. It said nothing else.
Oh my
We would
God.
drag it out when there were new people and we were explaining just what's been going on. And look, this is where we were. Let's celebrate where we are. Let's move forward.
But you knew I could see how passionate you are about
Yeah.
that. You knew that the only way to really create change was legislatively.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. That's how I
That's
got
the
involved
power.
with it.
the-
Once you've done all you can, they're on the floor. Once you've done all you can talking with the hospital leadership, there actually is another place to go. Many of the best things that go on in Connecticut are funded largely by the people in Connecticut. You know, it's not a for-profit business. We don't even charge the people who receive the services usually because they're receiving surgery services that don't allow them a living where that can happen.
That's right.
But so that makes politics the answer.
So did you right away get on the health committee? I mean, when you
No. I won a special election. Peter, what committees would you like? Well, you know I'm a nurse. I'd love to be on public health. And they started laughing then. I said, Peter, we have said no to 33 Democrats before you who wanted to be on the public health committee. We're very pleased you're a nurse, Peter. Welcome aboard. But we're not telling those 33 people that you deserve it more than they do with all their time in the legislature. I understand. You know, after the next round of elections, when it was time to be naming committees again, I was on public health.
Okay. And public health is responsible for so many things.
It's remarkable.
It is remarkable.
You know, and we've leaned on public health as a system and as a department more and more these last couple of years. You know?
So let's look at some of the legislation that we were talking about on public health, from palliative marijuana all the way to the needs of food insecure students. I mean, that came up with the COVID. Didn't that come up?
Who knew? I'd heard it before then because people come to the Capitol and tell you what's going on, because it's one place where if we can get enough people agreeing, we can do specific things about it.
How do you interact with your constituents? If there's a need, okay, because you can't be everywhere and you can't have everybody's ear all of the time, which is one of the reasons we invited you here today.
Thank you.
How do you provide that dialogue to find out what's really going on at the base?
First, the first thing is not something that most folks say, but you'd be surprised what a difference it makes having legislative plates on your car. 2 people came up to me on Saturday or Sunday. Whenever I went grocery shopping, I felt guilty. My father raised me to believe once you're retired, you grocery shop during the week when everybody else is in work.
Of
and I
course.
cannot go, now that I'm retired from nursing, I cannot go outside of normal working hours without feeling horribly guilty and having a real reason why now. But anyhow, I'm putting groceries in. 2 different people came up to talk to me about things. One, a nice young mother with her son, you know, who actually was talking about things that worked. And the other was a guy who had been connected with CCSU, but I assume was now a graduate and living in the area. And we had a nice conversation about where we're headed and what we should be doing. So while that's one of the least obvious things, people think that, oh, you get legislative plates so that the police will let you do anything. And you know what legislative plates are good for with the police?
Parking garage.
Exactly. If you go to a funeral of somebody well-known that's full and they're asking people to park down the street, when they recognize your legislative plates, oh, come in, representative. We have a space for you. But other than when I'm unhappy and going to a wake, that doesn't do a whole lot.
Except
to
shine
help
a
with the
flashlight
police.
on your car and say, here's a state rep, talk to me.
I'm also surprised at how many people feel free to come up to the door and ring the bell. It makes sense if they're the dog walkers in the neighborhood who we talk to regularly. But there was a while not too long ago when people came up and complained about their tax increase on their property taxes. And how can you? Don't you people realize? And blah, blah, blah. And I would say, oh, you're 100% right. You know, mine went up too. But these are property taxes. This isn't what the state does.
Right. People don't always understand that.
Right. And oddly enough, when told it was a local government in New Britain and not that government in Hartford, the number one response was, oh, I guess it has to be. That loyalty to New Britain and our government and to the local elected, the closer you get, the more connected you are.
Isn't that
Yes,
something?
yes, it really is.
Yeah.
We're still, although it's changing, a community of community organizations, whether it's the Polish Pulaski Democratic Club or it's the parents at the elementary school in my district. People invite us in to talk all the time. Fortunately, seldom do they ask me to do it on TV, so I don't have to worry too much about how I look or if I'm making sense the first time I try to explain something. But if you're close enough, it's always there.
And the reason, for television, even though you just support the folks in New Britain, which is quite a lot, the system is the same at the state.
Oh, yeah.
So those that are watching from Farmington or from Bristol, for example, their state reps have the same job to do based on them and based on. Now, can you choose your committees, or are they chosen for you?
We ask for our committees.
Okay.
And early on, my first list of committees I wanted to be on, one of them was energy and technology. I'd followed it closely for 10 years while my father was a member of the committee. My father was one of the last liberal Republicans in Connecticut, maybe in all of New England. I asked for energy and technology, and I got it, in part because my father had been on it, he had passed away, there was an open seat, and by rights, the Republicans should have said, no, we'll name a Republican to put there.
Right. They didn't?
No, they were fine. They weren't going to win or lose anything based on one vote on a committee where we strive for consensus and often don't make it. But still, with these goals, it was very nice of them. And no, you can be on that. So when I would tell people my committees, when I got to energy and technology, everybody who was an insider would stop me and say, ooh, that's a good money committee. If you're on energy and technology, you don't have to worry very much about raising money for your campaign. It's just going to show up.
Because?
You have so much possibility of influencing what goes on.
Absolutely.
And remember, for many of these folks, all they want is for the good deal not to change. All they want is not to share their good fortune with others, especially at the large corporate level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very powerful.
I don't pretend that money has no influence on politics. I never did, because I don't believe that never did.
How do you handle that?
Oh, eventually we passed campaign finance reform. It's wonderful. I have to raise a certain threshold amount of money from X number of different people in the town that I represent.
Okay.
In smallish donations between $5 and a couple $100+ and we have to raise $5,000+, I think. And if you do that, then you qualify for a grant from the state to run for office. So, if you're on the PTO at your school and you're getting fed up with what's not changing, and you look at your local elected person and think, I could make a decision that bad in half as much time. Why does he have that office and not me? You may well already know enough people to qualify with small donations for campaign finance reform. It's really opened up the process.
That's good.
If it's helped one party over the other, personally, like a good Democrat, I think it's helped the Republicans more. There are places where no Republican would get a message out, where people wouldn't bother saying, we're not going to help you, help the Republican brand by putting your message out there. Now we do. The folks in the legislature, we have made it phenomenally easy to run against us.
So tell me, how has the pandemic changed what you're talking about? Because now you may be not in the LOB, the Legislative Office Building, where I walk down the hall and I see you and I say, oh, by the way, or...
Oh, exactly.
That's not happening. How has that changed?
I learned more things for the first time in the cafeteria when somebody stops by my table, at the table I'm at, and says, Peter, do you know about this? maybe if they're former, they'll call me Representative Tercyak. Or actually, if they're former, they'll call me Representative. And if they're almost cowed, it'll be Representative Tercyak, at which time I always use the same joke. Well, you don't have to call me Representative Tercyak. Representative is good enough.
So now,
But
they don't, they're not
it's
saying-
horrible. It's horrible,
So how are you
horrible,
doing
horrible.
Zoom?
We use Zoom all the time. And all that's done is make for more meetings that last longer.
And you don't
It's-
get one-on-one though.
No, no.
It's in a group setting.
When I was chairing committees, I would tell the members, people are trying to get through this who are like regular citizens, and this is time out of their lives. If you want to say how wonderful it is to see that person from your hometown who you know so well, you can stand up when they're done and meet them in the hallway and say, you did a great job. Thank you so much for coming and telling your story.
Right. Don't take up the
But we
time.
all could be doing that repeatedly.
Right.
Now, when freshmen do it, they're freshmen. We'll remind them after the meeting. They'll see how things work,
Yeah.
and it'll become more useful. They'll see that people aren't insulted if you sit there quietly, give them a nod, and then meet them in the hallway, or even just don't meet them. You know, but a nod that I was attentive. But there's a new person in that chair.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we only have 3 minutes left, but I want to talk.
Holy moly.
I know. You have to come back. I want to talk about term limits a minute because we were talking about Senator Dodd before we started the show.
Yes.
And, you know, we were talking about some folks just not referring to Senator Dodd, but in general saying term limits, term
Oh,
limits.
yeah.
But tell me what your perspective on term limits is.
There is no place in the Constitution that says we should have term limits. There was nothing in our earliest days of the country suggesting term limits. Once we had a president get elected for a third term, FDR, a Democrat, and people who didn't like him thought, my God, the people love him. They will vote him in until he's dead and maybe one election after that. They decided on what President Washington wanted for himself is what it should be as law and passed term limits. Term limits are almost always suggested by the out party because they aren't succeeding with their argument to get enough support to become the in party. So let's reset things and go back to the beginning. If we go with term limits, then the people in the building with experience are going to be lobbyists.
Well, that was a point I had never heard before. Yeah.
They're going to be staff people who are there forever, and staff people come from where they come from. An early and nice moment on the Labor Committee, once upon a time, was the representative from CBIA was talking about this, why this proposed law is bad. This is bad, and that is bad, and it'll do this, and it'll do that. And we let him go on. And he ends with, and then this is just a poorly written law. You shouldn't take up a law that's written this poorly. The Senate chair of the committee looked at him and said, now you've gone too far. I don't know how you've forgotten where you are, but until this year, you were the legal counsel for this committee. You, in fact, are the individual who wrote this law that you now oppose.
We've seen that over and over, haven't we?
Yes, yes. Very interesting. Well, I think it was a poorly written law too, and I think he did it on purpose because he couldn't bring himself to make it easier to accomplish whatever it was we were trying to accomplish. You know, but wow.
It's
park your car in a new place, and hey.
And you know, those of us who are not in there every day, like you are,
Yeah.
it's easy to say, why is this happening? Why is that happening? But to know that there's people like you who are very experienced and who are in the trenches and know what and how to maneuver for the people in New Britain. We're very grateful for your service. And please come back, because we didn't even start with
Holy moly.
Representative Tercyak.
I know.
Yeah, I
we
know.
have 6 good questions, people.
I know. We have to get him for live so he can take calls, because I know you would love to do that. And so we'll talk about that. So for all of us at Nutmeg TV, up close and personal with Representative Peter Tercyak. Until next time, good night.